Lass uns über das Präfix fore reden. Fore ist ein Verbalpräfix in der deutschen Sprache, aber es ist auch eine Präposition in der deutschen Sprache und es ist leicht, die beiden zu verwechseln. Das entsprechende Wort in der englischen Sprache ist before, aber pass auf, dieses Wort auf Englisch hat mehrere Bedeutungen und so ist es auch mit fore in Deutsch. Wir können zeitlich sprechen. Zum Beispiel, ich stehe vor dem Gespräch. Das bedeutet, dass bevor das Gespräch anfängt, stehe ich. Wir können auch räumlich sprechen. Zum Beispiel, ich stehe vor meinem Motorrad. Das bedeutet gar nicht, dass zuerst ich stehe und dann steht mein Motorrad. Das ergibt natürlich keinen Sinn. Das bedeutet, ich stehe im Vordergrund. Mein Motorrad steht im Hintergrund. Es steht hinter mir. Ich stehe vor ihm. Vor hat eine dritte Bedeutung in der deutschen Sprache und das ist ago auf Englisch. Zum Beispiel, das ist vor langer Zeit passiert. Oh, das ist alle ein bisschen verwirrend. Aber keine Sorgen. Heute haben wir einen wunderschönen Tag. Lass uns ein bisschen fahren, während wir lernen. Das hier ist Lernen und Fahren. Point for dramatic effect. Let's start in English. Now, technically, the word before in English has two meanings, although the second one is pretty rare in modern English. Usually, when we say before, we are talking about things happening in a sequence in time. For example, this thing here happens before that thing there. Okay, no problem. There's another definition of for, which is a little bit old-fashioned, and that means in front of. For example, in olden times, if the king ordered someone, kneel before me, he is not saying, first you're going to kneel and then I'm going to kneel. That's not it at all. What he's saying is, you are going to kneel in front of me and I'm not going to kneel at all because I'm the king. This definition of before meaning in front of is pretty rare in modern English, but it's still very much alive in German. We see it quite a lot with vor. Schauen wir uns ein Beispiel auf Deutsch. Ich warte vor dem Restaurant. This sounds almost in English like you're saying, I'm waiting for the restaurant, but be careful here. The German preposition for, although it's pronounced almost identically to the English word for, F-O-R, it's not related. For, the preposition in German, is actually related to the archaic English word fore, F-O-R-E, which is still around in some English words like in the foreground, and it means in front of. In modern English, we would say before. Now, technically in English, you could say, I'm waiting before the restaurant, in the sense of like I'm in front of the restaurant. But it's a pretty good bet that you would be misunderstood in modern English because almost no one uses before in that sense anymore. Okay, so if the preposition for in German serves double duty, sometimes it means describing things in space and other times it means describing things in time, then how do we tell them apart? How do you know which is which? Well, usually it's obvious from the context of the sentence. For example, ich mache das vor dem Meeting. That cannot be interpreted spatially because a meeting doesn't have a physical presence. That can only be interpreted reasonably as meaning I'll do that before the meeting. Okay. And then the other example we looked at in the intro, ich stehe vor meinem Motorrad. That cannot be interpreted temporally because my motorcycle can't stand up. It's obvious that I'm speaking in a spatial sense. I stand before my motorcycle in the old-fashioned sense of that word in English. I stand in front of my motorcycle in modern English. Okay. Aber was ist mit vor als Verbalpräfix? Beide Bedeutungen funktionieren hier. Wir können nicht nur räumlich sprechen, sondern auch zeitlich. Manchmal ist das Präfix for ähnlich wie das Präfix pre auf Englisch. Zum Beispiel vorbereiten, to prepare, vorbeugen, to prevent, vorhersagen oder voraussehen, to predict, vorheizen, to preheat an oven, etc. und so weiter. Mit diesen Worten wird vor zeitlich gemeint, aber wir können auch räumlich sprechen. Zum Beispiel vorlesen, vorsingen, vorspielen, vorleben, vormachen. Ich mache etwas in Anwesenheit von einer anderen Person. In English you can say I'm doing something before someone else, not in the sense of like before they do that thing, but more in the sense of, oh, that's a nice spot right there. Are you sure you don't want to do a tripod shot? Look at that. Look at that view. Ich tue oder mache etwas in Anwesenheit von einer anderen Person. Zum Beispiel, ich lese etwas. Okay, das bedeutet wahrscheinlich, dass ich allein bin und dass ich leise bin. Aber ich lese etwas vor. Das bedeutet, dass ich wahrscheinlich nicht allein bin. Jemand hört mir zu. In English, you can say I'm reading something before someone, not in the sense of like before they read it. I'm not describing things happening in time. I'm saying I'm before them in the sense of in their presence. In English, you might say I'm reading to someone. It implies that I'm not reading to myself. Ein weiteres Beispiel. Jemandem etwas vorleben. That means to set an example for someone. But what does that have to do with before? Well, figuratively, I'm setting this example before you for you to consider and to learn from. A similar example would be jemandem etwas vormachen. To demonstrate something to someone, to show them how it works. I'm going to perform this thing, whatever it is, before you, i.e. in your presence, so that you can learn how it works. Wow, it is nice out here. Look at this view. This is beautiful. This is beautiful. I hardly ever come down this way. Manche Beispiele scheinen nichts damit zu tun haben, aber schauen wir genau hin und wir werden diese Bedeutung finden. Some of the following examples don't seem like they have anything to do with the word before in English, but let's take a look more closely and we can find that definition. For example, vorstellen. What does that mean? That can mean to imagine something. Stell dir vor, dass wir reich wären. Imagine that we were rich. What does that have to do with before? Well, stellen means to set or to put. So it's like I'm saying, put this idea before your mind's eye. Imagine this, if you will. Stell dir vor. And again, we see the usage of the English word before. Put this before your mind's eye. Another definition of vorstellen is to introduce. And again, stellen means set or put. So, ich stelle Ihnen meinen Bruder vor. I'd like to introduce you to my brother. I'm setting or putting my brother in front of you or before you, so by way of introduction. How about vorwerfen? To blame or accuse. This is a weird one because werfen means to throw. So what does that have to do with before? Well, it's like, figuratively, I'm throwing the blame for something in front of you or before you. Or how about vorschlagen, to suggest something? I love this one. Schlagen means to hit or to punch. But the word vorschlagen in German means to suggest something. How is that related to before? Well, kind of. Figuratively, it's like I've got an idea that I want to suggest, so I'm going to punch it into the foreground. I'm kind of reaching here. But again, we see at least a loose relation between the German verb prefix for and the English word for, the old archaic English word for, F-O-R-E. I'm putting it before you. How about this? There's an expression in German, ich laufe vor etwas weg. I'm running away from something. How does for relate to before in English in that sense? It looks like it doesn't at all. It looks, in fact, like for there means from, because in English you would say, I'm running from something. Okay, but again, think about Old English. How would you say that in older versions of the English language? You could say, I flee before it. No one would say that in modern English, but that is perfectly valid older English, and that really illustrates, I think, the relationship between the verb prefix for in German and the word before, the archaic version of the word before in English. I flee before it. Now in German you can also have Angst vor etwas. Ich habe Angst vor, großen Katzen. How does for relate to before in English in that sense? Well, this might be a reach on my part, but think of something like, when a big cat stands before me in the sense of in front of me, I have angst. How about vorkommen? To occur or to appear. How does that relate to before? Well, again, figuratively, something can appear before you in the sense of in front of you. And again, we see that same equivalence between the German prefix for and the English word before in the archaic sense. Now, there are a few wonky ones that don't seem to fit the pattern, and I can't seem to find a way to hammer them into that pattern. I think these are just special cases. I'll just put them up on screen. I'm not going to go through them in detail. There's always exceptions whenever you're going through something like this. These ones just don't fit the pattern. Or if they do, I just don't see it. Okay, before we close this episode, let's talk about the German word before, because they happen to have this word also with the same pronunciation as English, different spelling, and the same meaning as English in the sense of comparing things happening in time, not comparing things happening in space like the archaic definition of the English word before. Okay, but if they've got a preposition for, which refers to things happening in time, why do they also need the word before to refer to things happening in time? Well, this one's a bit tricky. And there's a rule of thumb that you can use, which I found quite helpful. And that is, if you're comparing verbs or actions, then you will use the word before in German. But if you're putting it in front of a noun, then you use the preposition for. For example, ich stehe auf, bevor meine Freundin steht auf. I'm comparing two actions, so I use the word before. This is very intuitive for English speakers because it's the same exact way we would say it. But if you are using it with a noun, then you do not use before, but rather the preposition for. For example, ich mache das vor dem Meeting, or ich stehe auf vor dem Gespräch. So I hope this was a good quick tour of for in German. Yeah, there's more to it than that, but that kind of gives you a quick overview of the preposition and the verb prefix. So that's all for today. We will see you next time on Lernen und Fragen.